I got my start in 1976 with my acceptance to the Air Force Academy. I had always aspired to fly. At first I thought I wanted to fly in space because I was born the same year that the space race began. But quickly found out that it took pilots to go into space, and which led me in a whole new direction and something I was eager to learn about and wanted to experience myself. As I looked around when I was in high school, it looked like the Air Force Academy was the most sure thing on how to get into a cockpit, and that was my ambition, and I was determined to make that happen. So I was happy to gain acceptance to the Academy. Went there with some trepidation, thinking I would be in line with a bunch of supermen, and I was just an ordinary kid. But went through some tough summer training and found out that everybody else put their shoes on one foot at a time and were just other normal kids. And we went through a rigorous training program. It was tough, but with the idea, the end in sight, the goal of getting into an Air Force cockpit, it made it easy. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be because that kept that goal in mind. I saw some of my classmates take other directions, decide to leave. They didn't have the will or the determination. I'm not sure they were quite attached to the goal as I and many of my other classmates were. The experience at the Academy was important in that it was sort of a warm-up for the kind of responsibilities and leadership, and laid a foundation of values for my and my classmates' careers in the Air Force. We had got plenty of leadership practice to run our cadet squadrons and flights, which really mirrored in sort of in a practice and training way the kind of responsibilities that we would have later on as Air Force officers. The honor code was an important element of the Academy experience because as a young kid coming out of high school, you may not be so solidly attached to the values of owning up to your mistakes and not trying to cover things up, which is sort of covered by the will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate anyone among us who does. And it takes a little bit of a practice to say, well, I messed that up. It might be easy to make up a story on why that happened, but it's important to own up to those kind of mistakes and say, yeah, that could have gone better and it was my fault and here's what I learned from it. I think that's a much more valuable life lesson than to try to evade responsibility, and that's something that is enforced in everybody through the honor code. It becomes vitally important later in combat because decisions and events have dire life and death consequences. And anyone that's less than honest is sort of hurting our entire side. Let's say that maybe on a bombing mission you missed the target. And we found out, for example, early in Desert Storm, some of our bombing was inaccurate due to some of the software in the F-16 because of the altitudes that we were bombing from and the weapons that we were using. If people were dishonest and say, I dropped my bombs and I got hits every time, then you would say, well, maybe it's not a system problem, maybe it's an individual problem. Whereas if everybody owned up, said, yeah, it looked like my bombs went a little long, then we're able to work on the whole system at large. So, it's an important bit that you learn early on, and hopefully that carries through, and it's important in the business that we are in, where lives are on the line. Another important element of the Academy experience was the role models that we ran into and met and interacted with. I got to the Academy in 1976 in my freshman year. That was just 3 years after the Vietnam War. The Academy was chock full of combat veterans who had flown over Hanoi in Route Pac 6, who had flown as forward air controllers over South Vietnam, who had laid it on the line to attack their targets, to save the Americans on the ground, to help the Vietnamese. And And there was also a substantial cohort of men who had been shot down and captured and spent time in the Hanoi Hilton. We learned all their stories, heard them in classrooms, in lectures, in dining outs. And my roommates and I would come back and sort of share those stories back and forth, recite them over and over again, just thinking about how difficult some of those situations were. And what that does to capture and to hear and to interact with a story like that, it creates an aspiration in everyone. It poses a question. If that was ever me in a difficult situation like that, would I be able to perform as those who had gone before me have done? Will I be able to do my duty? Because it sounds really hard and really tough. But the other side of that question is a goal, in that you have an aspiration. If that ever happens to me, I know what's expected, and I have to hold the line and maintain my honor and do my duty as those who have gone before me have done, and hopefully as those who have come after me will do if they ever have to serve under such difficult circumstances. So to sustain and maintain that long blue line, maybe not so long yet, a little over 60 years, is an important thread, an important element of what we do as airmen. So I graduated from the academy in 1980. I went to pilot training. I achieved a lifelong dream up to that point, earned pilot wings. I taught T-37 jets for a couple years at pilot training, and then in 1984 went to fighter training and flew EF-111 jamming aircraft, F-111 light fighter bombers. And then in 1988, I moved from F-111s to F-16s, which was, the hottest fighter, and was really something that I was just excited and happy to be part of. I went to Han, Germany. It was in the midst of the Cold War, and just 2 short years in Germany. After 2 years, Saddam invaded Kuwait, and President Bush said that this will not stand, and the Air Force mobilized and moved to the desert. So to go from the Cold War, Central European front, big conventional battle, it was a shift in several dimensions. Our squadron, for example, in Germany was built to fight in place. We didn't have a deployment mission. We had hardened shelters, hard ops, and we were ready to defend West Germany. So we had to figure out how to mobilize, how to pack up the squadron, how to get out of town. We left that to a lot of the support side of the squadron. And for the pilots, we had to revise our tactics. This is before GPS and before some of our precision technology. And our tactics in Germany were going to be to have to go in and hit the Warsaw Pact tanks coming west. Because the weather is frequently bad in Central Europe, many of our tactics were designed to be at low altitude. We were going to have to come in under the clouds to be able to find our targets. And I tend to think not a lot of us were going to come back from that mission, thinking in retrospect. But in the Middle East, the weather is good most of the time, and you can come in at high altitudes and avoid a lot of the anti-aircraft guns, because you can dodge SAMs, you can defeat MiGs, but it's really tough to get around guns. You got to avoid them because there's so many of them you don't know where they're coming from. So to come in at high altitude meant that we sort of had to change some of our formations, change some of our bombing tactics, and squadrons realized that and sort of moved to those medium altitude tactics at slightly different paces. I was thinking about it. I was a flight commander. I told my 8 guys one day, I said, and I think this was around September, so the invasion of Kuwait was in August, and then we ended up deploying in January. Around September, I said to the guys on my flight, hey, I don't know if we're going to go or not, but if we do, I think this fighting is going to be different. So let's go up at 25,000 feet and just practice some bombing runs from up there instead of down on the deck like we usually do. And I thought they'd either look at me like I'm crazy or they'd get in line behind me and they thought, hey, this is great, boss, good idea. So we had been kind of working on that, and I sort of took that step as a flight commander. The thing that I learned about from that experience was, although I wasn't in charge of the squadron or the wing, and I wasn't going to dictate tactics, I was a flight commander and I was in charge of 8 guys. And I could see what I thought the mission was going to be. I translated it into what we should do within our small organization. I felt like the things that I did were only limited by my own imagination and my field of responsibilities. I was in charge of training my 8 pilots as best I could, so we practiced some of those different tactics. Within months, other flights and rest of the squadrons in the wing started to move to some of those tactics, and eventually the whole wing got trained up to those standards. But the thing that I learned about leadership is you often can't fix the bigger problem. But when you're put in charge of an organization, you ought to take whatever actions that you can and not be constrained by sort of this is the way things are done. Think about what ought to be done and how you can affect the people that you're in charge of. You're not going to be given infinite latitude, but within the latitude that you're given, you should take every action that you can to accomplish the mission, to get your men and women ready as possible, and to give them all the tools possible. So we packed up our squadron and we went to the Middle East. And we were only there for a couple of weeks before the war started, before the shooting started. We were fortunate. Some of the other squadrons from Virginia and South Carolina, from Shaw, from Langley, got there in August and sort of sweated out the desert, sort of holding the line as the Air Force, as the coalition, the ground forces all built up in Saudi Arabia to coil and to prepare for the offensive. So got there about New Year's, and within 2 weeks the war started, and we flew our first missions. You wonder in your heart, okay, I've trained for this. I've been in the Air Force 10 years, been flying for 10 of those years. What will combat be like? Will I be able to perform? Will I be able to do my job? And you've obviously got all kinds of training, but the unknowns are, will this be like the way we trained? And what I found was we usually train harder than the actual fighting actually is. All of the blocking and tackling and preparation really pays off, and you're able to focus on the job. Our first missions were very large attack packages, 40 airplanes with support packages of a half dozen Wild Weasels, a half dozen F-15s for CAP, air refueling tankers, AWACS, etc. And you're part of this big armada going towards enemy territory for the first time. You look to the left, you look to the right, you see these proud men on your wing. You say that they're doing their job, I'm going to be able to do my job. I don't want to let them down in any way. I want to make sure that I get my job done to the best of my ability, fly my plane to the greatest precision and the best effect, get my bombs on target, help them do their jobs, and let's get everybody in and out alive. So my first attack mission was against Talil Air Base, which is a big airfield in southern Iraq. I was towards the back of this big 40 aircraft attack formation. I was in charge of the last tail end Charlie, the last 8 guys. There was another 50 or 60 plane raid that was going in parallel to us, about 40 or 50 miles further to the east, and another big raid even further. So you felt, wow, how are they going to stop us? This much firepower and these many folks coming in. The target came up pretty quickly. The weather was pretty poor. There was an undercast. We were going to do a sort of a roll in, like the Black Sheep Squadron, a 45-degree dive. But the weather was unsuitable, and we had to go to a backup mode of dropping the bombs on the radar. So it was interesting. Being raised on shows like 12 O'Clock High, and my first bombing mission wasn't very much different from it. I was able to break out my part of the airfield on my attack radar in the F-16. I steered my aiming cross to it. I centered up my fire control computer, and I brought my wingman into close formation and told him, ready, ready now. I dropped my bombs, and when my bombs went, his went just like a B-17 formation. So, yeah, we were dropping 2,000-pound bombs. So for each F-16, a pair of 2,000-pounders. And
LGBs?
nope, these are just unguided bombs.
World War II?
World War II, exactly. When my bombs go, you pickle your bombs. And we hit Tooele Air Base with 82,000-pounders in a 2-minute window. So I can't imagine how miserable it would have been down there for the people on that air base. Came back and hit that airfield several times during Desert Storm, and then, interestingly enough, operated there many times over Southern Watch against that same vicinity. But then over the next week and a half to 2 weeks, stayed in these big strike packages, hitting scuds, factories, strategic targets, regime targets, infrastructure, factories, etc. Once those targets were hit and some of the strategic targets were broken, then we shifted to much more of an assembly line kind of mentality, where we struck Iraqi army forces dug in Kuwait and in southern Iraq. You know, American air forces are led in flight by the most capable guy or gal now, a mission commander. So in charge of each of those big strike packages, it would be a mission commander up front, maybe a captain, maybe a major, sometimes a lieutenant colonel. The most capable lead. It's a meritocracy in the air. They make all the on-the-spot decisions. And the authority granted to them by the Joint Forces Air Component Commander in Desert Storm, it was Chuck Horner, was almost absolute. I look at this as a generational lesson. General Horner and his deputy General Glosson flew as captains in Vietnam and felt micromanaged. And before Desert Storm kicked off, General Glosson came and briefed our wing on the war plan. And he said, I want you to attack the targets however the captains and the weapons officers and your wing commanders think best. And a pilot asked, are you going to allow us to go in at low altitude? He says, if that's what the wing decides is best, that's going to be a wing level decision. Those leaders were out to correct the mistakes in command and control and to remove the micromanagement and allow the flight leaders to make the flight leader type decisions. And they weren't going to dictate conditions from Riyadh. They were going to allow people on the spot to make the best decision possible. What that did was that empowered every flight in the sky to get the job done as best as possible. It's the kind of move that unlocks people's initiatives and ensures success. It gives us the best chances for success, because somebody far removed from the scene with some synthetic displays just doesn't have the same information as the man or woman on the spot looking over the canopy rail. When we devolved to the smaller operations, now it was individual four-ship flight leaders making those on-the-spot decisions on how best to attack the target and get his men home. We attacked many artillery and tank and logistics sites related to the Iraqi army. Republican guards were dug in along the Kuwaiti and Iraqi border, and they got a lot of our attention. We knew that as airmen, this was a really vital job, because we could see the ground forces building up on the Saudi side of the border, and soon there would be enough forces to launch a ground offensive to eject the Iraqis from Kuwait. We knew that the better that we did our job, the more of those guys on the ground would come home alive. We had already won air superiority. We had knocked the Iraqi fighters out of the sky, and they were making a run for Iran just for survival. We had broken the will of the surface-to-air missile battery operators, because when they turned on their radars, they got a high-speed anti-radiation missile coming down against their radar. So they were afraid to shoot at us. The anti-aircraft gunners, we just more or less tried to stay away from them and bomb from above, because we had carved out a sanctuary at medium and high altitudes that were really invulnerable. So we had carved out a niche where we could play ball, and we had an infinite number of balls, and we could just keep hitting them because it was low cost to us because of that air superiority effort at the beginning of the campaign, where we ranged all over Iraq and knocked out the air defenses. So we knew that the better that we could do our job, the more successful the ground offensive would be, and the more Americans would come home alive, because any ground fight was destined, we believe, to be bloody. On February 23rd, got to put that into practice. The ground war started after about a month and a half of the bombing. And my wingman and I, we were ready to go and support the ground offensive, whatever it took. The Air Operations Center, General Glosson, sent out a message to all the wings. Essentially, it said this: the ground war started. It's up to every airman from this point to get their job done and support the ground troops as best as we can. We're not going to make any weather calls or call things off from the headquarters, and it's up to every airman to do his job. I looked at the guys in my flight. I said, this changes everything. You guys think what I'm thinking? They go, yeah. I said, this means that if the weather's bad, we're going to press. We're not going to, save things up and go home, because now we no longer have the option, if things look bad, to not attack the target, because now guys are going to be relying on us. There's not going to be any weather aborts. If there's any way to get stuff done, we're going to press in there and get the job done. And within a day or two, we were really pressed against this. On February 23rd, I was going up to bomb some tanks in the vicinity of the Kuwaiti border. The Killer Scout, which is an airborne FAC, gave me the coordinates, and I typed them into my computer, and I looked at my inertial navigation, and there was like 100 or 150 miles to go. It was way beyond Kuwait and southern Iraq. I asked him to verify the coordinates. He says, yeah, that's it. And I was astounded to see that we were going to go about halfway up to Baghdad. I said, what's up? And as we flew north past the Euphrates River, I didn't even have a map for where we were going. I could hear voices now breaking through on the radio. It was a desperate situation of some troops on the ground about to be overrun. Then the first night of the ground offensive, they had inserted long-range surveillance detachments, special forces throughout South Iraq, and several of them had been discovered. So we were now flying in to help these men who had been discovered by the Iraqis. So the FAC stayed around long enough to put my eyes on where the good guys were. They were hard to see because there's just 8 guys hiding in a drainage ditch. And then when I saw them, he says, okay, great, you got it, I'm out of gas, and he left. And at that moment, I thought, man, this is all on us. The only way that these guys are going to get out alive is if we can do our job to the utmost. So we started dropping our cluster bombs. Each of us had 4, a conservative distance out, and we kept one fighter coming down final all the time. And the guy on the ground would call, okay, next bomb 50 meters south of that one. Okay, next bomb 20 meters further east. Can you bring it in closer? And these were cluster bombs that had an impact about the size of a football field. I said, no, I don't think so. He says, well, we're under hard dirt cover. I go, well, yeah, these are armor piercing too. So he says, okay, don't push it. We brought it in, inside of 100 yards of the good guys, because the Iraqis, it was a company or more, were trying to surround and capture these American Special Forces, been discovered. We walked our bombs in closer still until at the peak of the Iraqi attack, my number 3 and 4 man, Evan Thomas and Pete McCaffrey, dropped their bombs inside of 30 meters of the good guy's position. The radio operator was looking out over the edge of his ditch, and he said, "I saw the F-16s roll in. It was like watching a movie. I saw the bombs come off in slow motion. I saw the cluster bombs break open. I said, get down, this is going to be close." They all laid down at the bottom of the ditch. The cluster bombs went off just over the lip of the ditch. He said the whole world was shaking like a bowl of jello and explosions. And he got on the radio, "That's it, that's the one we're looking for, no more bombs." And they crawled around the trench, and the Iraqis had been killed just around the corner from them. With that, the Iraqi infantry lost their heart for their attack. They pulled back, and relays of F-16s came in behind us to provide close air support for those guys until the helicopters were able to come in after dark. It was that mission, more than any other, that cemented for us the value of all that hard training, of all that accurate flying, our ability to put our bombs on target. The payoff was the lives of those other Americans on the ground. We were going to do whatever it took to get those guys out. As an airman, you are put in the trust of incredible power. You fly a very sophisticated aircraft that has tremendous capability. You have a tremendous bomb load that can wreak incredible destruction. A misplaced bomb would have killed the friendlies. An accurate bomb could save the friendly forces. With that power comes a sense of duty and a sense of obligation, that I'm the only one that can save this situation. It's up to me and no one else. No one else can do it to get these guys out alive. Not all situations turn out with good endings. This one did, and it was a tremendous payoff, emotional payoff to us. It was the most tension we'd ever felt because we knew their lives were on the line, but at the same time, it was the greatest reward to know that our professionalism, accuracy, precision, and actions had won the battle, and there were 8 Americans going to come out alive. The cause, what we're fighting for, doing your job to your utmost, being the best possible airman, all came into practice at that point. Earlier in the campaign, I put some 2,000 pounders, I led a mission against an artillery factory, and I watched my 2,000 pounders go through the roof of the factory. And at the time I said, yes, okay, I hit, that's great. We hit the target, we achieved our mission. When I got back on the ground later, 2 hours later or so, because we're flying pretty long missions, I thought to myself, I wonder if there's people down there in that factory. And, as an airman, you're detached from some of the fighting, right? It's not a close-in, eyeball-to-eyeball fight with pistols and knives. We are detached through our technology, through our distance and standoff and whatnot. So it poses a question, though, at some point. Am what I'm doing is what I'm doing morally right? Is this okay? Am I okay with it? And for me, it was an open-ended question. Wasn't sure. But the mission where we saved those men on the ground, for me, that dispelled all uncertainty about whether what we were doing was the right thing. In this case, it was our guys are killed or captured, or the enemy is killed. It was a very stark choice. It was morally very clear on what it was we needed to do. We as American airmen exercise proportionality and discrimination. We don't bomb civilians, and we are proportionate in our use of force. Those two conditions are sort of the moral basis for our warfare from the air. And if you operate by those, follow the rules of engagement, follow the frag order, and do your utmost to use restraint and avoid collateral damage and don't intentionally target civilians, that discrimination and proportionality, those are key moral foundation for what we do. And it's important for us to know that what we're doing is the right thing. 3 days after the support of the Special Forces, the ground offensive was rolling along really well. Maybe we had a few more weeks to go. Saddam's forces were being routed. There was a big left hook coming through Kuwait, getting ready to cut off the Iraqi army. My force ship was fragged. I was leading my three other wingmen into South Iraq again, likely to attack more tanks and artillery, and provide close air support for the 18th Airborne Corps, which is the far left side of the hook. We didn't get any targets. They didn't have anything for us. We could have saved up our bombs and headed on home. No mission because the ground battle was going so well. Well, we didn't operate that way. We were in over enemy territory. We had a load of bombs on our 4 fighters. So I called AWACS, I called the Joint Stars and the other command and control agencies saying, hey, I got 4 fighters, where you got some targets? Eventually they said, yeah, we got some movers in this vicinity. Please go to these coordinates. Tell us what you see. We'll try to get you clearance to drop. It was during the mother of all retreats. Iraqis were trying to escape from the pocket that was closing around them. When I got to the coordinates that they described, I could see a hole in the clouds. It was going to be difficult to maneuver my force ship. I told my number 3 and 4 men to hold above the clouds. Number 2 and I ducked through the hole. It was probably about 14,000 feet. We bottomed out, came out the bottom at about 9,000. I looked around the coordinates. I didn't see anything. My wingman said, I got some movers over here. I circled back around, and as I circled back around, I felt a big explosion in the back of my F-16. F-16 just bucked over, and all my warning lights came on, and the airplane started tumbling end over end, and I was in a burning, out-of-control airplane. I knew that in the next couple of seconds I needed to grab for my life or I was going to be a dead man. So I was pinned up against the canopy. I could see where the ejection handle was. My hands were thrown up against the top of the canopy, pulling negative Gs. I reached down with all the strength I had. I got a hold of the ejection handle. I closed my eyes. I pulled. The canopy blew off. I was sucked out of the airplane. My parachute opened up, and now I was suspended over a battlefield. I floated down slowly. I knew in that instant everything about the war had changed for me. I wasn't going to go back to my base. I wasn't going to go back to our little makeshift officers club. I was floating down into the middle of a Republican Guards infantry division. Anti-aircraft guns were shooting at me. I could see tracers streaming by my side. I pulled out my survival radio. I described where I was. I floated down to my wingman. There wasn't much they could do for me. I hit the ground pretty hard. It was either that point or the point that I went out of my jet. I broke both bones in my lower right leg, so I kind of flopped down on the desert. I released my parachute, and there was not going to be much for me to do. The ground was flat as a pool table. Iraqi troops were converging on me. The nearest guys were 100 yards away, piled out of a Jeep that was coming at me. 4 of them were advancing, attacking with their AK-47s. I had a .38. I left in a holster. I decided to surrender. I had to get them to stop shooting at me. As they crept forward, they had their guns trained on me. They motioned for me to get up. I couldn't. My legs were broken. so they kept coming forward. When they were 30 yards away, I saw a puff of smoke behind them in the distance a mile away. I looked up and there was a little smoke trail. They had fired a surface-to-air missile, and as I looked up, I could see my wingman flying over. They were trying to bring him down with me. I knew in that instant that I was in a world of hurt. I didn't want anybody else in that situation with me. I had to do something. So I unsurrendered as their guns were trained on me. I grabbed my survival radio and I said, break right, flare, flare, flare. My wing broke right, the missile decoyed behind him, and he escaped. I was delighted. The guys with the guns, though, weren't so happy. When they saw me grab my radio, they pulled the triggers on their AK-47s as they ran at me. Bullets kind of hit all around where I was. I threw my radio down. They shot my radio. They shot my helmet. They shot my survival raft, so I couldn't paddle anywhere. Shot my survival kit. It was kind of like rain hitting the ground. They grabbed me up and they threw me in their Jeep, took me to their headquarters. Well, the funny thing, if there's a funny thing about this, of course my radio call was on the emergency frequency on my survival radio. So every airplane within 100 miles heard this desperate, break right, flare, flare, flare. So every airplane in the sky broke right, and all kinds of pilots called my squadron commander and said, I don't know who that guy was, but that guy saved my life. Thanks. I said, well, as much as I'd like to take credit after the war, I told my boss, as much as I'd like to take credit, I just saw my wingman getting shot at, and I'm glad it worked out for everybody else. Could have been a surface-to-air missile, infrared guided. Could have been a golden BB from an anti-aircraft gun. So I don't know. You just don't know. There were some folks that saw the wreckage of my F-16 afterwards, after the war. The ground troops. We had some air liaison officers attached. Said, yeah, it looked like maybe a warhead of a SA-13, which would have been a big infrared guided SAM. But I don't know. I didn't see it coming. The Iraqis threw me in their Jeep, took me to headquarters. Eventually they took me up to Baghdad, asked me a lot of questions, beat me. It was pretty tough. It wasn't fun. But here's where some of those experiences from the men that had served in Stalag Luft in Germany and Hanoi Hilton came into play. They had made it through worse. I can make it through here. It's me against you. I'm going to pose your questions to the utmost of my ability because that's what is expected of me. At one point, I was being questioned, and there was some other Americans in the vicinity. In fact, survivors of a helicopter that tried to rescue me. And they said, what was your mission? I said, I'm not going to tell you. What kind of plane were you flying? I'm not going to tell you. So they took me out of the room, and they took me down the hall. I said, okay, Andrews, we know you couldn't answer those questions because the other Americans were there. You couldn't say anything in front of them. Well, we got you down here in this room. Nobody else can hear you. It's just between you and us. Now you can tell us with no problem. Nobody else will know. And if you tell us what we want to know, everything's going to go good for you. If not, I can't tell you what's going to happen. I'm going to have to turn you over to some people that are going to be a lot worse. I said, nothing's changed. Whether they can hear me or not, I'm not going to tell you anything. And they kind of beat their fists and they said, haven't we been good to you up until this point? Haven't we taken care of you? Didn't we help fix your leg? Yeah. Still doesn't change it. I got to do what I got to do. You got to do what you got to do. Kind of a tough thing to say. So they said, fine. We wash our hands. They turned me over to some rough guys who then really started the beatings. You know, I could have told them stuff, and it was pretty harmless information. What kind of plane do you fly? What kind of missiles does it carry? I mean, this is kind of stuff that a 13-year-old in America would know. But I would know, and my job was to make things as difficult as possible to America's enemies. My war wasn't at 500 knots. My war was at 0 knots inside of a little bitty room. And my duty was to do my job and maintain my integrity and to resist these guys to the utmost of my ability. So, how did I know that? Well, sure, I'd been briefed on the American Fighting Man's Code of Conduct, and I had been trained on that at resistance training, and I had gotten resistance training. We're a little prisoner of war camp at the academy, and those were all important, right? They give you important tools. They say, okay, this is the good cop, bad cop tactic. What am I going to do about that? You can kind of analyze this and think through what's going on. But at the end of the day, your guts tell you this is going to be hard. This is going to be really bad. I'm not going to have any fun here. This is going to hurt. Guys before me had done it. I heard the stories. They've been through worse. I'll come through this okay. And I got to believe in God, and I got to believe that Bush and Schwarzkopf are going to come get me. It's a hard, hard thing to think that you are nothing but a pawn in the clutches of infinite evil, and that is the way that I saw things. I knew that they were bad guys, and I knew that we were the good guys. I expected the bad guys to hurt me. It didn't make it fun, and it didn't make it pleasant in any way, but in a way it gave me the strength to resist, because I knew we were on the good guys' side. And that is why I believe that we can never use torture as Americans. We have to maintain that moral high ground because it gives strength to our own fighting men and women to do the right thing. I had strong faith in God. I prayed a lot. Rick Smith was one of the pilots in my squadron. His dad was a thud driver and went to the Hanoi Hilton. And before the war, he passed on a quotation. He said, pass on to your guys, Snuffy, that Rick, when things are tough, remember where there's life, there's hope. And for me, that was sort of my life preserver when I would bottom out, when my morale would plummet. I said, I'm still alive, I've got hope. I believe that quotation's from one of the Gospels. I'm not sure which it is, but that was a really essential life preserver for me when I would bottom out. Other things that buoyed my spirits and gave me strength was letters from my family that said, if anything happens to you, don't worry about your wife and your family. We'll be there for them. Turned out my wife's dad flew out to Germany to be with her and hold her hand while I was in captivity, and actually when I was missing in action and then in captivity. So that was reassuring. And my wife and I had had a difficult talk before the war, and I said, you know, hon, there's going to be people shooting at us. We've got big jamming airplanes and all sorts of electronic stuff to protect us. The F-16's pretty maneuverable. I can dodge stuff. I've got an ECM pod. I got chaff. If they hit me, I got an ejection seat. I'll try to get to the good guys' lines, and we got all kinds of dedicated rescue forces. And even if I get hit, I might get captured, and here's how this is going to go. So we had kind of had that very difficult talk, and that was reassuring to me. So there's many different reassurances. At the point that I was shot down, turned out to be the second to last day of the war. I thought there was a few more weeks worth of the war to go. Turned out it was just another day. The war was over the day after I was shot down. It was just a few interrogations, and it wasn't a prolonged campaign to wear me down or to break down my psychology. Some of the other men who were shot down early in the war had much different experiences. So when they, at the very end, the guards were sort of saying, hey, make sure that you tell everybody that we treated you well and we treated you nice. And I mean, there were a couple of guards that were okay. And, a couple of those guys had a point. A couple of them didn't. So yeah, I mean, they knew the war was over. But they were lying to us. There were big sonic booms over Baghdad, over the Baghdad prison and over the city. And what that was is American fighters doing supersonic runs over the city to just make their presence known and signal that things were going to be okay. I'm assuming for us, and sort of tell the Iraqis that all was lost. Well, I couldn't see them. I was in a jail cell, and the guard said, "Oh, that's the Iraqi Air Force putting on displays for the people, for the Iraqi people." So yeah, they quick to lie about everything.
That was your friends letting you know.
Yeah.
Just like they did in Linebacker 2, in the bombing of the B-52s.
Yeah.
They're there for you.
Yeah. So we were turned over to the Red Cross, repatriated in Riyadh. I saluted General Schwarzkopf at Riyadh Airport. We went to the USS Mercy. He took care of everything for us, treated our injuries and broken bones and things like that. It's amazing how tough you can be under duress, right? The day before, I'd been in this prison. I was hopping down the hall to use the latrine on one leg, hopping back, trying to balance myself because they wouldn't help me. And now I was in the arms of my countrymen aboard a Navy hospital ship, and they were going to make sure, they made it clear, they were going to take care of everything, and they did. They took care of my wounds, fed me, clothed me. They said, everything's going to be okay, and it was. That outpouring of love and concern was just overwhelming. We knew we were back. We knew everything was going to be okay. We went back to the United States. The Mercy is where they collected all of the prisoners. We felt an incredible sense of relief, just overwhelming joy. We were allowed to phone our families, so we called home and had very relieved conversations with families who didn't know our status. Several of us who were missing in action. So it was just a really happy time. The folks on the ship, were prepared for a lot of mass casualties, and as the campaign for Desert Storm unfolded, it was wildly successful due to American training and technology and, sort of the lack of it on the Iraqis' part. So they were relieved, but in a sense disappointed that they didn't have a very big role to play. And yet for us, we became the war for many of the people on the USS Mercy. And to be part of our repatriation and the care and concern for us, you could just sense that their enthusiasm, that they fed on our, and enthusiasm as well. And they'd bend over backwards to do anything we could because they wanted to take care of us. And if I could kind of connect that to back in the U.S., I had my leg set a couple times on the Mercy. Didn't work. It was going to take surgery. So I was returned to Andrews Air Force Base along with the other Air Force POWs at Malcolm Grow Medical Center, where the Air Force took care of us here in the U.S. just a few days after the Mercy. And I had to have surgery to put a rod inside my right lower leg to put my bones back together. And at that point, my leg had been broken for a couple of weeks, and it had shrunk up, and they had to stretch it out. It hurt a lot. And I came to in the recovery room of the hospital after the surgery. I looked up at all these faces around me, and I was really confused. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was happening. I only knew that my leg hurt worse than anything I had ever felt before. I looked at the people and I said, I just have one question. I said, what? Is this the United States? I said, yes. I said, oh, good. And I just passed back out with a smile on my face because I knew no matter how bad it hurt, everything was going to be okay. I made it back, and they were going to take care of me. And they did. 4 months later, I got back on a flying status. I was happy to get back in the F-16. I was happy to get back in the cockpit. I went to a training job to teach F-16s down in Arizona. I went to school, Air Command and Staff College. I went to some staff job. Southern Watch was going all at that time, no-fly zones. And there was sort of a deep-seated question in my heart as to whether I would be able to go back and fly combat over Iraq again after having been a prisoner. And it was sort of a question that I could keep sort of deep-seated, but then as I got promoted to lieutenant colonel and was likely to return to a flying job, most likely as an operations officer and maybe a commander, would I be able to do it? The thing about leadership in a fighter squadron, you have to lead from the front. You can't lead from a desk and say, go out and do this job. The squadron commander flies right in the front ranks with all the other pilots. The best lead. Hopefully the squadron commander is good enough to lead complex combat missions. Not all of them are, but thank God most of them are. So there was no hiding from this. It's a glass house as a leader in an Air Force unit. So I had to come to this decision. My time to return to fly was approaching. Would I be able to lead men in combat over Iraq again? I thought back to the men who had led me, the squadron commanders who had led me in Desert Storm 5, 6 years earlier. I said, when things were tough, things were scary, they said, everything's going to be okay, follow me. I said, I want to be that guy. I've been there, done that. If I can tell them and lead my guys, tell them, get behind me, everything's going to be okay, that's something that I can give back to the Air Force, to my troops, to the United States. And at that point I was committed, I was all in. I went back as a ops officer, a squadron commander, and a group commander, and flew in many combat missions. In Southern Watch, I flew over the spot and fought over the spot that I was shot down several times, which is sort of an odd experience. And then in 2001, participated in the campaign to overthrow the Taliban and you know, the fight against bin Laden in Afghanistan, which concluded my flying assignments as a 06 group commander. I feel like I was at a watershed in technology, right? I came in mass attacks, unguided bombs, and I concluded my combat tours with satellite-guided GPS bombs over Tora Bora that were, you know, precision accurate from 30,000 feet. I guess one way to capture this sort of thread of continuity. Quentin Antonsen was a P-47 pilot, flew in the 366 fighter group in World War II. Did a wonderful documentary called The Fighter Pilot Story, where he put together photos and film clips and his own narrative of his experience in World War II. I was the commander of the 366 fighter group 60 years later. Antonsen relates a story where American soldiers were under pressure, under attack from German tanks in a town. And he had to press down so low and drop his bomb so close, he was dreadfully afraid of killing the good guys and you know, not getting them out alive. When I heard his story, I immediately thought back to my mission to support the Special Forces. I wrote Mr. Antonsen a letter. I said, you know, even though the technology has changed so much, the same desire and willpower to use that technology to support the good guys, to bring them out alive and to defeat our enemy doesn't change, no matter what the technology does. And I think the heart and the spirit of the warrior telescopes across those 6 decades and continues to do so into the future. when I flew in 2001 against the Taliban and Al Qaeda. Small special forces detachments talking to me on the radio, worried about what's over the next hill, and me able to fly over that hill and say, everything's going to be okay, there's no bad guys over there. We're going to get you back alive, we're going to do everything we can, is a continuity that warriors share that telescopes regardless of the change of the technology, and it's an important thread that we must sustain, and I'm confident that we will over the years, no matter which way technology takes us.